Okay, I think I will get us started. I know a few people will keep trickling over the next few minutes, but I want to leave enough time for Bob and our question and answer period, which proves to be just a great part of this seminar series. If this is your first time joining us, this is our annual winter quarter seminar series looking at wildfire policy and research. I'm Derek Fong, and I come here wearing the hat of facilitating the discussion today, as well as encouraging people who are interested in either students or faculty or outsiders or participating in our Big Earth Hackathon, which happens in the spring, looking at wildfire problems. So if you have any questions about the Big Earth Hackathon, which I'll give a few spiels on in the upcoming weeks on how to get involved, contact me. My email address is there. This has been a great series so far. We've got a diverse set of speakers, and today's speaker is no exception of bringing a wealth of perspective and understanding to this very complicated and important problem that faces us. I would also want to acknowledge, by the way, that this series is supported by the Bill Lane Center and Woods Institute, as well as Stanford Sustainability Data Science. Our speaker today is Bob Roper, who a couple people recommended to us. You got to get Bob to come talk because I would pay money to hear him speak. And you, thankfully, by contacting me or being part of Stanford, you get to hear him for free today. Bob has been in the fire service for over 45 years, starting as a volunteer firefighter, then rising to executive positions. He served in the Ventura County Fire District for 34 years, the last 15 as its fire chief. He then became the Nevada State Forester and now is the chair of the California Fire Safe Council and policy advisor to the Western Fire Chiefs Association. During his career, Bob Roper continued his formal education and became focused on wildfire problems due to its dynamic nature and challenges. As fire chief of CAL FIRE, Contract County, and chair of the Fire Scope Board of Directors, he became quite involved in state aid agreements and the state response system. He furthered his national wildfire policy knowledge by becoming the chair of the International Association of Fire Chief Wildfire Policy Committee and serving on the Wildfire Leadership Council. This forum he was involved in required a global viewpoint of the nation's wildfire problem and an interaction with the National Association of State Foresters, federal partners, and international wildfire community. Bob was instrumental in the development of the Ready, Set, Go program and was part of the development team for the National Wildfire Cohesive Strategy. During his career and post-career, which I would call this still a career, he's coming to speak to us today, Bob speaks at conferences, community groups, government entities, local, state, and federal, and he's authored various trade journal articles. He is currently serving his appointment to the President's Wildfire Commission. The list goes on of his accomplishments and contributions and knowledge, and I don't want to take any more time because I am so excited to hear him speak today, and I hope we will just have a lively discussion around what he talks about. I've spoken with Bob at the start of today. He's got a short presentation, and we will withhold questions. Unless there's something really, really pressing, let me know in the chat. We'll withhold questions and discussion until after his formal presentation. And then you can either raise your hand, speak up politely, or put something in the chat, and I will relay those questions to Bob. So with that being said, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand over the controls to Bob. Bob, thanks for coming to be with us today, and we're excited to have you with us.
Well, thank you, Derek. It's a pleasure to be with other people besides just the fire service, because the one thing we've learned over time, this is no longer just a fire service issue. I only have like 6 slides. I'll be talking more behind the scenes. You're not going to be getting all the doom and gloom pictures that everybody shows you with the hills burning and houses lost, because I feared that, you know, we have failed at trying to scare people into compliance. What we really need to do is start focusing on substantive issues to try to get people to understand really what's happening out there. So let me just get this going. There. Is that
We're good?
You can
Excellent.
see it. Okay.
We're all good.
So, you know, what Derek asked me to do is, you know, talk to you about the perspective of of, what do I think? Can we really address the wildfire problem? And my answer is basically yes, we can. But the question is, do we have the endurance, the common vision, the leadership, and the foresight to address it? And the reason why I say I believe it is we created the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy. It was submitted to Congress. Everybody has pretty much bought into that. And right now, we have a once in a lifetime opportunity that part of the infrastructure bill, the president created this wildfire commission. And the wildfire commission is designed to look to the future. Instead of putting the band-aids on today's current problems, we have to start looking out what's going to happen out in 2030, 2040, 2050, and decades in front of us. Today, I'm just going to be assuming that all of you have some basic knowledge about wildfire because you've been watching some of the other talks on here. We really have very little. When we look at wildfires, it takes heat, air, and fuel. We can't do much with the air except for trying to monitor the smoke and be custodians of that. We can't do much with the heat. What we can do is affect the fuels management. And for purposes of today, think that fuels management also includes structures, okay? And this has been the lack or the biggest factor that still remains under human control, but our challenge is, do we want to do something with it? So we ask ourselves, how did we get here? Without going into a lot of history, we have failed in our land management practices over time, evolving from indigenous cultural burning, where fire was part of our ecosystem, to the 1910 series of fires, when we began to exclude fire and say that we had to put out every fire. It was going from one area to the other. And now we're caught in that situation. We have inconsistent planning and development out there. Our focus has been on response because that's the sexy thing that the politicians and the public wants to see: an aircraft flying over a fire, dropping retardant. They never ask, is it effective? But from a psychological point of view, they want to see a response. And then we have to look at, human population growth has evolved from city, urban areas out into the wildland areas, and it's still one of the largest areas that is getting new residential housing. But we have to ask ourselves, have we had good codes? Have we had good planning? Have we been responsible in this? And have we really adversely affected our resource commitment and in our environment? What we know is that we're poor at building a common vision, and we're especially poor at breaking down silos here in the government. Fires don't respect jurisdictional lines, neither should we. So when we look at this, we go, well, what's our current challenges, which we almost have an endless supply of. But if we focus on the response action alone, we're not going to get there. That's a short stop. And that may sound strange coming from a person who's spent his career in the response arena. But I can tell you myself, many of my peers have seen the much larger macro level environment that we have to address. Truly, what we haven't done a good job on is reporting the true cost of wildfires, whether it's cost are financial or even environmental. There is a new report just recently out by the Council of Western State Foresters that's titled The True Cost of Wildfires. I strongly encourage all of you to Google it and to read that report. That is one of the few reports that are out there, besides like Headwaters Economics and others, that have taken and said that the cost of suppression, why it's easy to put in the newspaper, because those are tangible costs that are easily tracked, that's only about 30 to 40% of the true cost of a wildfire. So what we need to do is really start becoming honest with the people and telling them the hard truths. Number one, government is not the answer to the wildland problem. It takes personal responsibility really to make this work. How can we achieve success? We have to provide options, public education, policies, and enforcement when needed. We have to start standardizing some of our data, collecting good data, because within the wildfire arena right now, we have very poor data. And with poor data, it's hard to give the policymakers the background, the confidence that some of the tough policies, that decisions that need to be made, that they can stand tall because the data supports the action. And when we think about it, we get a group of us together and we're really good at coming to a meeting and commiserating about a wildland fire problem. But what we end up doing is we're usually short-sighted and we're just putting band-aids on everything. So as my part with the Wildfire Commission, I'm trying to introduce something, and I ask all of you to consider this. How often do you do it? Instead of just talking about single focused items, have we ever created what I'll call right now is a wildfire nirvana, something that creates a vision of what the future wildfire world should be? In our perfect world, don't think about the obstacles and the bureaucratic hurdles that keep us from doing something. Try to define what the wildfire world, what the optimum level is. If you think about it, you can start building better consensus. You can make bigger, bolder recommendations because you know where you want to get. We know that reality will interfere in the middle of this, but think about this. Try closing your eyes, turn up the thermostat in your room, and throw on some spa music and just think, where do we want to take the wildfire world? With that being said, I'll just, we start looking at things. I created this matrix because a lot of people will just look at the cohesive strategy, which is landscape, fire adapted communities, and response. But you really need to create a matrix, however you want to do it, and involve all phases of the planning. The goal of this is to create an understanding and make things move forward. When we talk about what does the optimal world look like, when we talk about landscapes, let me offer you a few things. This is not complete because I only have about 30 minutes to give you some ideas, but let me start you thinking about this. The optimal landscapes is something that there's ongoing maintenance to maintain it, and we have healthy ecosystems of mixed fuel types. We have healthy forests for recreation, cultural, water, biological, carbon sequestration, biomass products, and timber resource benefits. We have regular use of prescribed fire, grazing practice, and other deliberate practices to maintain the landscape and provide biological and ecological benefits. Think of this, that we could have actually, as we give carbon credits, we could give water credits out there so that rural areas, instead of encouraging development to get tax dollars in, they have something else to protect the headwaters of the vital water sources we have, whether it's in the forest or also in the different chaparral types. And the other thing is the full recognition that not all of our ecosystems are the same. A lot of the time, we talk about wildfire, but we keep talking about the continental US. I was recently in Hawaii and spending time there. It was enlightening to know that their ecosystems are much more delicate and has to be addressed differently. So when you think about the Virgin Islands, Alaska, the continental US is not the end all. When we talk about optimal communities, we should be looking at fire adaptive communities that can withstand a wildland fire, even if there's no response resources available. That is a thought that a lot of my peers go, can we do that? Absolutely. It takes proper planning, codes, and construction, but it can be done. We need to create true risk maps instead of just hazard maps so that we can reward people when they want to invest in their structures or their community. They will actually understand they can change the hazard or the risk associated. We'll have the insurance company standing with the community members as a key partner because they have a shared interest along with mortgage companies in protecting our communities. And then we have the public's acceptance and to personal responsibility, that they'll understand that they have to prepare, respond, and evacuate and recover from this. When we look at response, we have to have a response system that we'll call it a national mutual aid system, something that there's one ordering system, one agreement system, one reimbursement system, something that gets you the closest resource across the country when you need it. We need a national decision support tool using the latest technology that we can actually detect a fire. We can take the first in company officer before they even leave the fire station. They'll be able to see where the fire is, how to get there, the values at risk, where the fire is going to be in 2, 6, 8 hours down the road, a list of recommended resources, and what will happen if the resources aren't there because they're on another fire. Now, how will the fire grow? So that's bringing technology into the play. We need a national aviation strategy that is built on some standards of cover, that the platform is dynamic enough to meet all the changing incident needs. And we really need to focus on perimeter control versus point protection. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And we need to recognize too that not all wildfires need full suppression action as mandated, but have managed fire tactics substantiated by decision qualifier to let some fires burn. Always, we will need a robust response system because no matter what, fires are going to happen due to lightning, fuels, and so forth. But realize this, is that there's going to be a point where on the two curves between response that you have to build up and the other systems of fire adaptive communities, as well as landscape, as soon as those actions start getting to a maturity level, your response is going to start leveling out. So while we may put more money in response today, you'll see over a period of time, the dividends coming from the other aspects of the cohesive strategy will start yielding some dividends. So with that, what we wanted to do is, really talk. I'll stop sharing some of this now and just talk with you, is that there's many other tenets that we have to come up with on how to address wildland fires. Right now we know that there's public health issues out there, that smoke doesn't just affect one community, it travels across the state, across the nation. We know that the EPA has put out now their new draft for the PM 2.5, the changes. We understand that the health effects are much more severe, not only for the public, but even firefighters have been dancing around this whole subject about wearing masks, how to deal with that incident base and so forth. But public health is a big issue that we have to try to deal with. Appropriations. Currently, the infrastructure bill has tons of money out there, but one of the biggest issues we don't have the capacity. So as the politicians give money and everybody has a feel good, how long will it take to build systems to have the capacity be able to really yield the results that we need to have? We need to consider the money that's being made available as really investments that are actually spent wisely and actually have a metric to have a definite yield to it. We just don't want to take this money and spend it. There's a difference between spending and investing the way we see it. We also want to make sure that when we look at diversity, equity, and inclusion, that we look at other areas, like we said, with Hawaii, the Pacific Islands, that we look at the different ecosystems out there, and that we look at cultural values, resource, environmental, and economic areas, that when decisions are made, they're made with all these factors behind the scene and include all the stakeholders, because now as we look at smoke management, smoke doesn't affect one area. So the stakeholders aren't not just in that fire perimeter. The stakeholders for this may be the fires in California. And those of you who may live in the Tahoe area or vacation there, you know that Tahoe and the Reno area just gets hit every year with the amount of smoke coming from California. We know that the policymakers, we talked that we need good data. We know that what we need to do is streamline some of the environmental procedures that we have. And when I said streamline, I don't mean get rid of them, because NEPA and CEQA documents were designed for a purpose and we're not throwing them out. But we do need to use technology to enhance them, to make them work a lot smoother, because right now some of the practices take us 2 years just to get to the point of putting fire on the ground. The big area we need to do is really look at science, technology, and our data. If for too long we've been waiting on the government to feed us all the data or all the technology issues and bring us up to a new dimension. We can't do it as government officials. What we really need to do is strongly encourage through venture capital, through private foundations, to work like Stanford is doing, to be able to use the private enterprise to really allow us to catapult as a catalyst into the future on what we need to do with technology. The big thing that we have to do within our systems, we have to eliminate the silos that continue to hamstring us. All taxes are generated at the local level, but when you talk to people in our world, it's the federal government can only do some things with their dollars. The states can only do some things, and local government. We have to remove the silos and start working together. There's shared stewardship programs out there, cooperative agreements. The silos are gently coming down, but still today we have these firewalls between the corporate effort that we need to get done, and they just constantly get in the way. We ought to look at creating master contracts to get some of our landscape work done. Like we said, the scale, the capability of capacity, the backlog of doing landscape work, dealing with our forests and our fuels is decades behind where we are today. And we continue to do feel-good, small acreage projects, but we don't connect the dots on those projects to make them into one contiguous effort to be able to get the real benefit of that. So one of the things we're looking at, working with some engineering firms, is can we take, as the federal government does, EPA Superfund cleanup contracts for large regional areas? Could you take master contracts like that to be able to allow the private world to come in, work with the federal and state partners on all the environmental documents. But then what we do is we start building that capacity to actually get the work done. This is, again, thinking outside the box, but it's something that we really need to start doing. Recovery. When a lot of people use the buzzwords of resilience, but resilience doesn't happen unless we deal with recovery. And the recovery efforts actually should start before a fire happens. There's, in all of our worlds, there's business continuity plans that we're mandated to have as part of our disaster plans to deal with what happens with an earthquake. How do we continue our operations, whether it's a business or government services? So part of resiliency starts at that early part. That gives us the headway to be able to start getting into recovery efforts at the end of the incident. We must be able to do that if we truly want to get those resilient actions and move forward. The workforce is one of our biggest challenges right now, as well as a lot of businesses, blue collar workers and so forth. We used to have people lining up for the fire service 3 blocks, 4 blocks long down the road when we had openings. Now today, there's only a half dozen people standing at the doors when we open a new recruitment. It's the same thing for the state level. It's the same thing for the federal jobs. The federal jobs is much different than local government as far as their pay scale. That is being worked on in earnest at the Washington level. It's still going to take time to get that. We also have in the workforce, we had early release for a lot of the inmate crews in every state. As those early release programs happened, we lost all the hand crews that we used to have. When I was in Nevada, we had almost 100 hand crews. Today, there's only really about 5 hand crews left in the state of Nevada. And the same thing goes for CAL FIRE and what they've had to do. CAL FIRE's had to hire full-time firefighters to be year-round now to actually make their hand crews work. So we have to really look at, as we talk about the fire season, the traditional fire seasons that we used to have, we say it's year-round now. As it's being year-round, now what we have to do is we have to remember we need a year-round workforce. How are we going to get that done? A variety of ways, from changing some of the immigration programs to be able to get enough people, to be able to change the rate of pay, benefits, time off, and everything. But right now, we're in a tough area because we enjoyed this last year. California didn't have a large fire season. And that was thankful because we just don't have the workforce that we used to have. I think the federal government is still about 40% below where they would like to be. So when we come up to the question about, can we really address the wildfire problem? I can tell you, I truly believe that we can. We have the right people, we have the technology. And if you look at it, there may be some division whether we use managed fire or not, prescribed fire or not, or how we do things. But the division among the group of us is really very small. Our biggest opponent right now is really building the capacity and then getting the work done. So with that, Derek, I'll turn it back over to you to see if there's any questions that we can start answering.
Bob, thank you so much for that discussion and hopeful tone. I think it's very genuine. You come genuinely across with a hopeful attitude. And yeah, I'll open the floor for questions. I have many, but I want to leave it to our audience to just start the discussion, which I'm assuming will be very lively because you touched on a lot of things. And Bruce, you're first up. You were quick with the camera and quick with the hand raise. So go ahead, Bruce. And others, please chat questions or raise your hand. We'll work with you.
Yes, so I want to go back to the vision thing that you brought up at the beginning of your talk. And you alluded, I think, to a real problem, which is the continued movement of communities into wildland areas. And you seem to suggest that there might be ways to incentivize people not to do this. We certainly haven't been very successful in California. So my questions are, number one, do you believe that there are some areas that are simply not safe to move into, even if we clear all the vegetation 100 feet away and all the other steps that are recommended by the Forest Service? Do you believe that there are areas that we should not be moving into? And then secondly, do you see anywhere in the West or elsewhere a community effectively keeping areas, keeping land use policies that keep people out of these areas? Is there anybody doing this effectively? And if so, what are the means for doing that?
Okay. Repeat your first part of that question one more time.
Okay, so the first question is, do you believe that there are areas where we should not allow businesses and people to move in, that you cannot really protect the structures, particularly for these very, very hot fires, and with the wind blowing 40 to 60 or even more miles an hour, they're obviously, the measures that we tell people are not going to protect them against that kind of firestorm. So are there areas that we should really take the policy of do no more harm, don't let people continue to move in the wildland areas? And then the second part of it is, what do you do about the people that are already there? But how do we stop from continuing to make the same mistake over and over again? And are there any places in the West that you see have effectively dealt with this problem?
Okay. The answer to your question is there are areas that are distinctively should not be built on because of the fuels, the topography, the weather conditions, and fire history. And if people build in those, they should, number one, know better. Somebody should have told them. But it's a complicated answer because across this country, a lot of our basic rights are private property rights. And when you have legal existing parcels that are out there for local government, because really the feds can't deal with planning or zoning. The state really can't either. It's the counties and cities who can do it. It's really tough for them to put any restrictions on legal existing parcels. Now, California, with the new fire safe regulations that were just adopted this last year, is going to make it real tough on those legal existing parcels. But the only way we can really deal with larger parcels is when it goes through a CEQA process, when you have to deal with the mitigation steps that are around those. As far as, are there any communities that have been highly successful in doing this? I can't tell you wholesale wise that there are. And that's partly because the cat's already out of the bag. There's already parcels that have been subdivided, and they may not be built on. But again, most of your communities, nobody has the political will nor the legal authority to keep people from building. They can put restrictions like the fire safe regs, which is going to be helpful, but it won't be absolute.
Yeah, so Bob, this gets us away from the optimism that you were hoping that we could get here, because I agree with you, every word that you say about how hard this is. Let me ask you, is the insurance and withdrawing insurance the answer? That is to say, if insurance companies, if we don't publicly subsidize the insurance and we let the insurance companies decide that it's, I'm not going to insure you if you move into that area, Is that an effective way to keep people from, because it's not as if they don't know this. It's not as if the people don't realize they're taking this risk. There's just they're willing to do it. But if you're insuring that risk, you're encouraging it. Should we be letting, letting private companies be the ones that give the bad news? You're not going to get insurance for this. If you want to take your risk, you're going to take your risk.
Well, it's coming down to that today with the way the insurance industry is running. But what we're finding is we're running into this new dilemma when we deal with diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're going to have some social economic vulnerable populations that can't afford to go to urban centers, and they're going to end up with the number of homes without insurance because they have no recourse. We also end up with, we'll see in the future, we're going to have a division of economic classes in the wild and urban interface. People who can afford to self-fund or self-fund their insurance, pay whatever premium that's out there, or they don't need insurance at all. So we're going to have more of the haves and have-nots in that area. Insurance is going to be helpful, but right now, at least in California, we still haven't been able to crack the nut and the real handshake between the insurance industry and the insurance commissioner's office on how do we get the balance of the incentives for insurance policy to get work done and what is the net result on the risk market. The actuarial groups that we're working with, they're still asking, show us the data to show that all that work that can be done will lower the risk, then the insurance goes away, the issue goes away. But it's the insurance industry is being forced into this, but it's not the end all solution.
Yeah, really, really compelling, Bob. And you raised a pretty important issue that was on my mind. And I don't want to sidetrack the conversation about have and have nots, unless you want to comment on the fact that not only is there insurance issues, right? There are people that have money, they'll hire their own private firefighters, right, to protect their property, right? And that's a pretty touchy topic in some communities in the WUI interface. We lost Dorna, who had her hand up, so I assume she'll check back. Do other people have questions for Bob or would like to start a new topic of discussion? Feel free to type something in the chat, raise your hand, or speak up.
Excuse me, may I ask my question?
Oh, there you are, Dorna. Good. I'm glad you're back. I thought you disappeared. Please go ahead.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for such a amazing presentation and topics for today. Second of all, I have a question from Bob. Do we have any high advanced technology as a detector we can put or install in the forest? In the case of starting any fire, they can send the signals to the fire station. Before the fire wants to distribute, the fire station can control or harass the fire at bay.
Okay, so the questions around the fire detection, and I can tell you this, is that there's no one technology that is widely adopted, and nor should we, because having different types of technology to detect fires is a great asset. So in my work, we've been dealing with vendors with different satellite systems that are emerging that will be launched, and probably there are some out there already that we're using from the military and private sources to be able to detect fires. The only thing is some of the satellites, the resolution of fire has to get to a certain size for it to be detected. Okay, so what we're doing elsewhere, there are alert cameras that started off small around the Tahoe area, and now it has spread like wildfire, pardon the pun, across the West entirely. The utility companies have put tons of cameras out there. Now the cameras are nice, and they've created the machine learning now technology to be able to tell what's a cloud and what's smoke. And so that is helping, and that's another detection. There's also detection devices that are, we'll call them sniffers, that are devices that are located in different areas that will measure particulates of smoke even before you really see a lot of smoke. But that's more localized. And then now there is also technology on a couple of fronts. One with one company that is putting devices on power poles that it can measure the general area around it for IR, as well as smoke particulates to know when a wildfire starts. There's also another company that has the technology that they monitor the grid system, and they can report ground faults and grid issues to the utility companies early on. In fact, some of them say that they've looked at some of the case studies for past fires, and they were picking up trouble spots 2, 3, 5 months before a large fire started. So there's a wide array of technology that's out there, and it's only going to get better or more comprehensive. But again, that's where I said we need to take that technology and tie it into some artificial intelligence for decision support tools. That will end up being a game changer for us in the future.
Okay, I see. Thank you so much for comprehensive reply. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, really great question and great answer. And again, I just wearing my other hat, this is something we like students to think about for our Big Earth Hackathon. Students in the past have participated in thinking about camera detection and using machine learning and AI to understand what's going on. Dan, you wrote a comment here. Did you want to speak up, or it was just really a comment about agricultural land as being another issue?
It's just a comment. The chief has done a phenomenal job outlining, a lot of the problems there. We could just discuss them all day long. So just, little points in there. Capacity that the chief hit on is a big deal. The silos are a big deal, and we do need to think about where we build. And oftentimes, even with the technology that we have to build, if we talk about our forefathers, they realize that if you build on a river bottom, there's a chances are that the river is going to wash your house away. So they didn't build on a river bottom. And no different, where we choose to put our houses, we do have to be accountable as a species about what we do for our own good and salvation. But if I take care of my stuff, what does the next person next door to me do, and how does that affect me? And that's where we get into the structures becoming a fuel type. So as the chief once again related to, then it becomes incumbent on local policies and regulations. But I do think we need to be careful. If we just look at the Sacramento Valley and trying to feed our own population as a part of the world, we're housing over vast tracts of agricultural land. And I think that just, figures, it's just one of a minute piece that figures into this entire equation.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's a great insight. I'm going to go in order here. I have Benet. I'll read her question off, and then Bill, I know you can't raise your hand, but you'll be after Benet's question. So Benet, you can elaborate, but you wrote in the comment, the chat, what about extreme fire weather warning and pre-evacuation? I guess Benet's asking about how good are those, or how well are they working, Bob, I guess? Or Benet, you can elaborate on that if you'd like.
Okay, well, let me.
Yeah, we in Berkeley, they've started declaring extreme fire weather when the humidity is very low, and the expectation is that we will have Diablo winds coming, and they're urging people at that point to pre-evacuate, and they're getting a spot forecast from the National Weather Service. So I'm just wondering whether that could help, instead of just having to respond when the fire's already started. Can we start to get people out of areas before? And can we use, maybe some better, early warning systems at that point to say, this is not a good situation. We need to move people out before.
Your question is spot on. We have the technology and we use it on a regular basis with all of the remote weather stations that are out there, that the utility companies have put in along with the fire service and universities and stuff. We have no trouble now getting up-to-date spot weather forecast. Our biggest problem is really trying to get people to pre-evacuate, because you can see the
Right.
person who cries wolf, how many times do you do it, before people just get laissez-faire about it. We created the program called Ready, Set, Go. And in that program, it was designed to do this, is to get people to raise their situational awareness. If they live in harm's way, understand that they live in harm's way. Now, when you buy a house in California, there's a disclosure about, do you live in a hazard zone? Okay, so at least that wakes you up. Okay, so what we're trying to do is get you to understand that, understand about weather. Like you said, low humidity, high winds. This should have the hair on the back of your back, thinking, a fire might happen. I should have my go kit ready to go. So when law enforcement tells me to leave, I'm already out. If I lived in Berkeley Hills with some of the road conditions that you have there, I would definitely be getting out before I smelled smoke, just because of the hazard. But dealing with human nature, if we do too many pre-evacuation notices, people will just get callous to it. So we will be doing them and telling people, raising their awareness, and we just need them to be part of the solution.
Great question. And thanks for the answer, Bob. Bill, you can't raise your hand, but I hope you can unmute yourself.
I think so. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Bill.
Hi. This question, I guess, is more on the long-term side. I've spent a number of years studying what's going on in terms of wildfires and the way they behave, and talking to folks like CAL FIRE and watching their interviews. And it seems like wildfires are behaving far more aggressively than historically. So if you look at the wildfires that went through Paradise, and you talk to the frontline, or watch the interviews with the frontline CAL FIRE people, they've never seen an ember storm like that. It was so pervasive in terms of speed, and so pervasive in terms of front. There was no front. It almost seems like we need to predict how wildfires are going to behave in the future, so we're not fighting the old battles. Another example is down in, I think there was some hit the Time magazine front page, that there were literally branches were flying up against the airplanes in Central California in a recent fire. So I was just wondering, is that a national, how are we going to do that?
Well, the new fire regime that we call it, we looked at it on a couple of different ways. We had a mass exodus of the baby boomers out of the fire service. So we had a lot of, we'll call it young blood, coming up through the organizations. For a lot of them, they truly never saw a fire like that. Somebody like Dan Reese, who's been in the fire service, we've seen extreme fire behavior before. Has it gotten worse? I would say so. But a lot of that is because of the decadent fuel conditions. We used to have a situation where we never burnt the southern part of the state at the same time the northern part of the state happened. And that was always good for us, because then the northern part is burning in the late spring and early summer. Southern California would go up and help it. Then what would happen is in the fall, when Southern California is burning, northern resources came down. Now what we're finding is we're having both ends of the state burning at the same time. Now we don't have the same amount of resources to be able to attack them. So some of the fires are getting bigger. But what we're finding in a lot of the areas is the wind is the one area that has drastically changed across the area, whether it's a Diablo wind, a Santa Ana wind. The winds have been more and more extreme. And it really was the year of 2017 was the defining moment when we started losing wholesale communities and large fires affecting all of the state. This change is happening. I'm not in the science world, but with climate change and all the factors, it is being proved now that the accumulated winds, the increased winds and so forth are really making a difference in our fire conditions, and it all ties back to climate change.
Great, thank you, Bob. I want to acknowledge that we are at 1:23. If Bob's willing to take a couple more questions, I'm happy to stay online and keep the recording and people going. But if you have a class or a meeting, just want to acknowledge that, and we'll keep going to maybe as late as 1:30. So are there any other questions? If not, I can finish up a couple too. So, any other questions or comments for Bob? This has been a great discussion, a great talk. Okay, I'll end with a little optimism then. Bob, I really appreciated you started to talk by framing the idea that we should be thinking of the nirvana we hope for. And like you said, there's a lot of money out there being tossed at it. Can you maybe name 2 or 3 things on your priority list that would allow us to reach the nirvana that you at least see in your head? And you probably have a better picture of what a realistic nirvana looks like given your 45 years of experience.
Oh, you know, the biggest things about achieving it is, number one, is asking yourself, am I only focused on today's problem, or am I focused on the future? Realizing that the federal government takes decades to change their practices on a variety of fronts. So we actually have to be there. Climate change is affecting us right now. But when we look at nirvana, we look at some basic things. One is a lot of the contracts we deal with are dealt with. We are constrained by a lot of federal contracts based on bureaucracies and rules and not the operations. We should have the operations driving what we need, and the rest of the system responds to support that. We're actually asked backwards and today and how we deal with contracts and services, that type of thing. But right now, we need to get people to break the silos down, to work collectively together as one in some of the division among ourselves, and really focus on what we're trying to get done. And that's why it's important for all of you. I challenge you, ask yourself, create your own nirvana, and ask yourself, are we thinking bold enough and far enough reaching to be able to achieve it? Recognizing that reality will always tame us in, but sometimes I don't think we look far enough.
Right. Well, with that being said, I want to thank you again, Bob, for your time today. If you have any follow-up questions, I can push them off to him by email, and you can even reach out to him yourself. I'm sure you can find him on the web, or I can give you his contact information. I hope you're a regular attendee. Next week, we have Mary Pernicki, who's going to talk about the health effects, which has been touched on by all our speakers, including Bob alluded to today, and how climate change, in particular wildfires, are affecting our national health landscape. Thanks again for everyone's attention. Thank you again, Bob. Have a great week and hope to see many of you again next week. Take care.
Bye.